cannot marry any of my sons.
The words sliced through the opulent mansion like a blade, causing champagne glasses to shatter against marble floors as Madame Choi's voice echoed through the grand ballroom. Anita Williams froze, her dark skin glistening under the crystal chandelier, her engagement ring suddenly feeling like a noose around her finger. The entire Choi family gathering turned to stare, their faces a mixture of shock and barely concealed disgust. Minjun, her fiancé and heir to the most powerful Korean Mafia empire, stepped protectively in front of her, his jaw clenched with rage. "Mother, you've crossed a line," he growled, but the damage was already done. In that moment, Anita realized she wasn't just fighting for love. She was walking into a war where her very existence was the battlefield. If you're ready to dive into a world where love meets danger, where forbidden romance ignites explosive family feuds, and where one woman's fight for acceptance could destroy everything, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because you won't want to miss how this dangerous love story unfolds. Trust me, you've never seen anything like what's coming next. The silence that followed Madame Choi's declaration was deafening. Anita's heart hammered against her ribcage as she watched the woman who was supposed to become her mother-in-law glare at her with pure venom. The older woman's perfectly applied red lipstick seemed to drip with malice as she continued her assault, her voice rising above the classical music that still played mockingly in the background. "Did you really think," Madame Choi hissed, stepping closer to Anita with calculated precision, her Chanel heels clicking ominously against the imported Italian marble, "that I would allow my bloodline to be tainted by someone like you? My family has ruled Korea's underworld for 3 generations. We don't mix with outsiders, especially not with." She paused, her eyes scanning Anita from head to toe with obvious disgust, people who clearly don't understand their place in this world. The gathered crowd of Seoul's criminal elite watched the spectacle unfold like vultures circling prey. Anita could feel their eyes dissecting her, cataloging every detail of her appearance, her dress, her very existence in their pristine world of inherited power and blood money. She recognized many of the faces from newspaper articles and police files, judges on the family payroll, politicians who owed their careers to Choi money, business leaders who laundered cash through their legitimate enterprises. Minjun's hand found Anita's, his grip so tight she could feel the tension radiating through his entire body. "Enough, mother. Anita is going to be my wife, whether you approve or not. I'm 32 years old, not some child you can order around anymore." "Your wife?" Madame Choi's laugh was sharp and cruel, like breaking glass. "You're my eldest son, heir to everything I've built with blood and sacrifice. You will marry who I choose, when I choose, or you will inherit nothing but shame and poverty." Uncle Choi Dae-ho, Minjun's father's brother and the family's chief enforcer, stepped forward from the crowd. His scarred hands, stained with decades of violence, gestured dismissively at Anita. "The boy has been bewitched, sister. This foreign woman has poisoned his mind with her exotic charms. Perhaps it's time for more direct intervention." Anita finally found her voice, though it trembled with a mixture of hurt and growing anger. "Mrs. Choi, with all due respect, I love your son deeply. I've proven my loyalty to this family more times than I can count. When the Yakuza tried to assassinate Minjun last year, I took a bullet meant for him. I've helped grow your empire's international connections, brought in contracts worth millions of dollars. You've been useful." Madame Choi cut her off dismissively, waving her hand as if brushing away an annoying insect. "Like a good employee. Like an expensive tool. But that doesn't make you family material. You see, my dear, there are certain standards that must be maintained. Bloodlines that must be preserved. You." She paused, savoring the cruelty of her next words. "You are a temporary distraction, nothing more." The crowd began to murmur among themselves, creating a buzzing tension that made Anita's skin crawl. She could hear whispered comments in Korean, some of which she understood well enough to know they were discussing her like a piece of merchandise that had been found wanting. "You know what I see when I look at you?" Madame Choi continued, circling Anita like a predator. I see ambition without breeding, desperation masquerading as love, and the dangerous delusion that you could ever truly belong in our world. Minjun stepped forward, his voice dropping to the dangerous tone that made enemies tremble and allies step carefully. Mother, you're making a mistake. Anita isn't going anywhere, and neither am I. I've given you the courtesy of introducing my future wife to the family, but I didn't come here asking for permission. We'll see about that. Madame Choi's smile was predatory as she gestured to two men in black suits who materialized from the shadows like demons summoned from hell. These weren't ordinary security guards. Anita recognized them as elite enforcers, men whose loyalty to the family was absolute and whose methods were legendary in Seoul's underworld. Mr. Kim, Mr. Park, please escort Miss Williams out. She's no longer welcome in my home. Don't you dare touch her, Minjun snarled, his hand moving instinctively toward the weapon concealed beneath his tailored Italian jacket. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as father and son faced off, years of accumulated tension finally reaching a breaking point. But Anita placed a gentle hand on his arm, stopping him before he could escalate the situation beyond repair. Her eyes never left Madame Choi's face as she spoke with quiet dignity that somehow carried more power than all the shouting and threats. I'll leave, Mrs. Choi. But this isn't over. Your son loves me, and I love him. You can't change that with threats and intimidation, no matter how many men in suits you have at your disposal. Can't I? Madame Choi's eyes glittered with malicious intent, like a snake preparing to strike. You have no idea what I'm capable of, little girl. You've lived in America, where people believe in fairy tales about love conquering all. This is Korea. This is the real world. Here, power is everything and you have none. As Anita turned to leave, her head held high despite the humiliation burning in her chest, Minjun caught her hand. His voice was low, meant only for her ears, but the emotion in it was raw and desperate. I'm coming with you. We'll face this together, like we always have. No, Anita whispered, her voice breaking slightly as she fought back tears that she refused to let these people see. Stay. Try to fix this. But know that I'm not giving up on us, no matter what your mother thinks she can do to break us apart. She kissed him softly, ignoring the gasps and whispers from the crowd, then walked away with her head held high, even as tears threatened to spill down her cheeks. Every step toward the mansion's ornate entrance felt like walking through fire, but she refused to give Madame Choi the satisfaction of seeing her break. Outside the mansion, Anita sat in her car for several minutes, hands shaking as she tried to process what had just happened. The engagement ring on her finger caught the light from the estate's elaborate security system, throwing tiny rainbows across the dashboard. For 2 years, she'd convinced herself that love would be enough, that she could prove herself worthy of acceptance into Minjun's world. Tonight had shattered that naive hope like glass against stone. Her phone buzzed with a text from Minjun. I'm going to make this right. I love you more than anything in this world. Don't let her poison your mind against us. But before she could respond, another message appeared from an unknown number. If you truly love him, you'll disappear before sunrise. This is your only warning and the only mercy you'll receive. Consider it a gift from a friend who understands the price of crossing the Choi family. The message sent ice through her veins, but also ignited something else, a fierce determination that had carried her through childhood poverty, through university on scholarships, through building her own successful consulting business from nothing. Madame Choi had made a crucial mistake tonight. She'd assumed that Anita was weak, that she would crumble under pressure and slink away into the night. She had no idea who she was dealing with. 3 days later, Anita was working late at her consulting firm when she received an unexpected visitor. Choi Hyun-woo, Minjun's younger brother, appeared in her office doorway looking disheveled and panicked. His usually perfect appearance was marred by wrinkled clothes and dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he hadn't slept in days. Anita, we need to talk, he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder as if expecting to be followed. It's about Minjun, and it's worse than you think. Her blood ran cold, but she forced her voice to remain steady. What about him? Is he okay? I haven't heard from him since that night at the mansion. He's alive, but barely holding on. Mother has locked him in the family compound under what she's calling protective custody. She's convinced the board of directors that he's mentally unstable, that his obsession with you is making him unfit to lead the organization. Anita shot to her feet, her chair rolling backward and hitting the wall. That's insane. Minjun is the most level-headed, strategic person I know. The family's international expansion success is entirely due to his leadership. Tell that to the doctor Mother paid $50,000 to declare him psychologically unfit. Dr. Yoon is a respected psychiatrist with a gambling addiction that Mother has been enabling for years. His official diagnosis states that Minjun is suffering from a severe psychological break brought on by an unhealthy obsession with a woman who represents everything his subconscious mind has been trained to reject. The clinical coldness of the fabricated diagnosis made Anita feel sick. She's planning to have him committed to a psychiatric facility, isn't she? Hyunwoo's laugh was bitter and hollow. Worse than that. She's already made arrangements with a private facility in Switzerland, the kind of place where wealthy families send embarrassing relatives to disappear quietly. Once he's there, officially receiving treatment for his mental breakdown. His voice trailed off ominously. She can control the family empire indefinitely, claiming she's acting in his best interests. And anyone who questions her authority can be told that her poor son's mind was destroyed by his dangerous infatuation with an unsuitable woman. It's actually brilliant, in a completely evil way. Anita began pacing behind her desk, her mind racing through possibilities and scenarios. She can't do that. It's kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy. There have to be legal remedies. Hyunwoo's expression was grim. She's Madame Choi. She owns judges, prosecutors, police commissioners. Half the Korean legal system owes their careers to her money and influence. The other half is too terrified of her to act against her interests. Then what are you suggesting? That I just give up and let her destroy the man I love? I'm suggesting that maybe it's time someone played the game by her rules. Hyunwoo leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But if you choose to fight back, you need to understand what you're up against. Mother doesn't just run a criminal empire, she is the criminal empire. She's spent 40 years building a network of corruption that reaches into every level of Korean society. You're talking about taking on your own mother. I'm talking about saving my brother from a woman who would rather see him destroyed than admit she was wrong about anything. His eyes were hard with resolve. She stopped being my mother the moment she decided that power was more important than family. That night, Anita found herself in an underground club in Seoul's Gangnam district, a place where information was currency and loyalty could be bought with the right combination of money and mutual benefit. The club's entrance was hidden behind a legitimate restaurant, accessible only to those who knew the right passwords and had the right connections. Hyunwoo had arranged a meeting with someone who could help, but he'd been deliberately cryptic about the details, insisting that some conversations could only happen in person. The person who slid into the booth across from her was the last person she'd expected, Song Mireille, Madame Choi's personal assistant and rumored to be the real power behind many of the family's day-to-day operations. Mireille was elegant and composed, her designer clothes and perfect makeup giving no hint of the deadly intelligence that had made her indispensable to one of Korea's most dangerous women. "You're surprised to see me," Mireille observed, her voice carrying only the slightest hint of accent despite her perfect English. "You shouldn't be. I've been waiting for someone like you to challenge the old woman for years." "Someone like me?" "Someone with nothing to lose and everything to fight for. Someone who doesn't understand that some battles can't be won through conventional means." Mireille's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Someone naive enough to think that love actually matters in our world." Anita studied the other woman carefully, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. "Why would you want to help me? You've worked for Madame Choi for 15 years. You're her most trusted advisor." Mireille's laugh was soft but bitter. "Trusted? Yes, I suppose I am. But love and trust are very different things, as you're learning. You want to know why I would help you?" She pulled out her phone and showed Anita a faded photograph of a young girl standing with two adults outside a modest restaurant. "This is my family when I was 16 years old. My father owned a small restaurant in Busan, nothing fancy, just good food and honest work. What happened to them? Madam Choi wanted to use the restaurant for money laundering. My father refused, said he wouldn't soil his family's name with dirty money. So she had him killed, made it look like a robbery gone wrong. Then she forced my mother to work in her brothels to pay off the debt my father had supposedly owed. My mother died of an overdose 3 years later, and suddenly I found myself orphaned and completely dependent on the woman who had destroyed my entire world. The pain in Mireille's voice was carefully controlled, but Anita could see the decades of suppressed rage burning behind her composed exterior. She's kept you close to control you. She's kept me close because I'm useful, and because she thinks that 15 years of comfortable slavery has made me grateful for my chains. What she doesn't understand is that I've spent every one of those 15 years planning my revenge, learning her secrets, mapping her weaknesses. Mireille leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I know where every body is buried, literally and figuratively. I know which politicians are on her payroll, which judges owe their careers to her influence, which police officers look the other way when her people break the law. And what do you want from me? Help me bring down her empire from the inside, and I'll help you save Minjun. But understand this, once we start down this path, there's no going back. Madam Choi will try to destroy everything and everyone you care about. Your family in America, your business, your reputation, nothing will be off limits. Before Anita could respond, her phone buzzed with a notification. A video message from an unknown number. Her blood turned to ice as she watched grainy security footage of Minjun being forcibly sedated by men in medical uniforms while he struggled against his restraints. Too late, Mireille said softly, watching Anita's face pale as the video played. She's already started moving against him. The question is, what are you willing to do to save the man you love? Anita's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms hard enough to draw blood. Whatever it takes. Good. Then we begin tonight. If you're as shocked as I am by this twisted family drama, make sure you hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Do you think Anita should trust Mireille, or is this another trap? Things are about to get so much more intense, so don't click away. We're just getting started with this revenge story. The next phase of their plan required Anita to do something that went against every instinct she had, return to the Choi compound and pretend to submit to Madame Choi's demands. Mireille had provided her with sophisticated recording devices hidden in jewelry and clothing, along with a detailed layout of the mansion's security systems that she'd memorized during her years of servitude. Remember, Mireille had warned during their preparation meeting, Madame Choi is paranoid but arrogant. She'll want to gloat, to make you understand exactly how powerless you are against her. Let her talk. The more she reveals about her methods and her network, the more ammunition we'll have when the time comes to destroy her. What about Minjun? How do I get him out of there? You don't. Not yet. Any attempt to rescue him now would only confirm her suspicions and make her more careful. We need her to believe that you're broken, that she's won completely. Only then will she let her guard down enough for us to strike. 2 days later, Anita stood once again at the imposing gates of the Choi estate, her heart pounding, but her resolve steady. The security guards who had thrown her out just days before now smirked as they escorted her through the ornate gardens toward the main house. Every step felt like walking deeper into a carefully constructed trap, but she forced herself to project the image of a defeated woman coming to beg for mercy. When she was finally escorted to Madame Choi's private study, she found the older woman sitting behind an enormous mahogany desk that had supposedly belonged to a Korean emperor. The room itself was a monument to power and intimidation, ancient weapons displayed on the walls, priceless artifacts arranged to demonstrate wealth, and photographs showing Madame Choi with presidents, prime ministers, and other world leaders. So Madame Choi purred, not bothering to look up from the documents she was reviewing. The little bird has come crawling back to the nest. I must admit, I'm surprised. I expected you to have more pride than this. I've come to negotiate, Anita replied, keeping her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. Negotiate. Madame Choi's laugh was sharp and mocking. My dear child, you have nothing to negotiate with. My son is safely away from your influence. receiving the psychiatric care he needs to recover from this unfortunate obsession. Your business is hemorrhaging clients. Word travels fast in Seoul about people who displease the Choi family. Your visa status is under review by immigration officials who happen to be old friends of mine. Anita felt each revelation like a physical blow, but forced herself to remain composed. What do you want from me? Madame Choi finally looked up, her eyes cold and calculating. I want you to disappear completely. Change your name, leave Korea, never contact any member of my family again. In exchange, I'll allow Minjun to return home once he's recovered from his delusions. And if I refuse? The older woman stood and walked to a wall of family portraits, her finger tracing Minjun's face in one of the photographs with disturbing tenderness. Then my son will spend the rest of his life in that Swiss facility, believing that you abandoned him when he needed you most. The doctors there are quite skilled at memory modification therapy, you see. They can help patients forget traumatic experiences, unhealthy obsessions. She turned back to Anita with a smile that was pure evil. He'll forget you ever existed. The threat of having Minjun's memories altered was like a knife to Anita's heart, but she forced herself to keep listening, knowing that every word was being recorded by the hidden devices Mireille had provided. Of course, Madame Choi continued, returning to her desk and pulling out a thick file, there are other ways to ensure your compliance. Your family in America, for instance. Your sister Sarah, who just started her residency at Emory University Hospital. Such a promising young doctor, it would be terrible if something happened to derail her career. And your parents, with their charming little restaurant in Atlanta, such a shame how often restaurants fail due to health code violations or immigration issues. The threat against her family was the final straw, confirming everything Mireille had warned her about. Madame Choi wasn't just ruthless, she was comprehensive in her cruelty, willing to destroy innocent people to maintain her control. Anita stood slowly, her voice deadly quiet. You just made a very serious mistake, Mrs. Choi. Did I? And what exactly are you going to do about it, little girl? You're alone in my house, surrounded by my people. You have no power here, no leverage, no resources. You're nothing but a temporary inconvenience that I'm graciously allowing to remove herself voluntarily. That's where you're wrong. Anita pulled out her phone, showing the recording app that had been running throughout their conversation. I have everything I need to destroy you. Madame Choi's laugh was genuinely amused. Oh, my dear child. Do you think I'm afraid of some little recording? I own prosecutors, judges, journalists. That device is worthless to you. Maybe this one is. But it's not the only copy, and it's not the only evidence we've gathered. Anita's smile was cold as winter. Your assistant Mireille says hello, by the way. For the first time, Madame Choi's composure cracked slightly, her eyes narrowing with the first hint of genuine concern. Mireille is loyal to me. She owes everything to my generosity. Mireille has been planning your downfall for 15 years, ever since you murdered her father and destroyed her family. And now she has everything she needs, financial records, blackmail material, evidence of every crime you've committed over the past decade. It's all been uploaded to secure servers with instructions to release everything if anything happens to me, Minjun, or my family. The color began to drain from Madame Choi's face as the implication sank in. You're bluffing. Mireille would never betray me. Am I bluffing? Check your primary offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The one you think only you know about. Anita's voice was steady and confident, drawing on information Mireille had provided during their planning sessions. Notice anything different about the balance? Madame Choi frantically grabbed her phone, her perfectly manicured fingers flying over the screen as she accessed her banking applications. Her face went white as she stared at the screen, her hands beginning to shake. Impossible, she whispered. Those accounts are protected by military-grade encryption. No one could access them without 15 years of patient observation, careful record-keeping, and a genius-level understanding of computer systems. Mireille is a lot more than just your personal assistant, Mrs. Choi. While you've been treating her like an educated servant, she's been systematically documenting every aspect of your criminal empire. The sound of vehicles arriving outside the mansion interrupted their conversation. Through the study's tall windows, they could see black SUVs racing up the circular driveway, followed by what appeared to be news vans and police cars. "What have you done?" Madame Choi demanded, her voice rising with panic for the first time since Anita had known her. "I've given your enemies everything they need to destroy you. The Park family, the Lee organization, the Japanese connections you've been skimming money from, they all received detailed information about your vulnerabilities an hour ago." Anita checked her watch with theatrical precision. By now, they've had enough time to position themselves for a coordinated strike against your remaining assets. "This is impossible. My security systems would have detected any breach, any unauthorized access to my files. Your security systems were designed to keep outsiders from getting in. They weren't designed to stop someone who's had administrative access for 15 years from copying everything she wanted." Anita moved toward the window, watching as armed figures emerged from the vehicles outside. Mireille has been the perfect inside woman, patient, thorough, and completely invisible until the moment she chose to strike. Madame Choi was now visibly shaking, her legendary composure completely shattered. "Those people outside, they're not just rivals. They're animals. They won't just kill me, they'll torture me for information about their own vulnerabilities. Then you'd better hope the police get to you first. But that might not be much better. I understand several prosecutors have been waiting years for enough evidence to bring charges against you." Anita's voice was ice-cold. "There's still a way out, though. But you'll need to make a choice very quickly." "What kind of choice?" "Release Minjun immediately. Call the Swiss facility and have him transferred back to Seoul tonight. Publicly announce that you're retiring from all business activities due to health concerns. Do that, and Mireille will leave you with enough money to disappear quietly to a country without extradition treaties." "And if I refuse?" The mansion's lights suddenly went out, plunging them into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting eerie red shadows across the room. In the distance, they could hear gunfire and the sound of helicopters approaching. "Then you won't live to see tomorrow's sunrise," Anita said quietly. "Your own board of directors is currently meeting in an emergency session to vote you out of power. Several of them have very long memories about family members you've had killed, businesses you've destroyed, children you've orphaned in your rise to power." Through the windows, they could see muzzle flashes as a firefight erupted between Madame Choi's security forces and the attacking rivals. The sound of breaking glass and distant explosions suggested that the mansion's defenses were being systematically overwhelmed. "This is madness," Madame Choi whispered. "Do you have any idea what you've unleashed? These people don't just want my empire, they want blood. They want to make an example that will be remembered for generations." "Then give them what they really want," Anita pressed. "Give them you. But first, save your son. Call Switzerland. Bring Minjun home. Now." With trembling hands, Madame Choi reached for her secure phone line. Anita listened as she spoke in rapid, panicked Korean, giving orders for Minjun's immediate release and transfer back to Seoul. When she finished the call, her face was gray with defeat and terror. "He'll be on a plane within 2 hours," she said, her voice hollow. "But this won't save me. Those people outside aren't interested in mercy or negotiations." "No, they're not. But they might be interested in a trade." Before Madame Choi could ask what she meant, the study door exploded inward as armed men in tactical gear flooded the room. At their head was Park Jin-ho, a man whose scarred face and missing left eye told the story of decades of violence and survival in Seoul's underworld. His remaining eye found Madame Choi and filled with savage satisfaction. Finally, he growled in accented English, clearly speaking for Anita's benefit. The Iron Queen falls from her throne. But instead of cowering, Madame Choi straightened, some of her old arrogance returning even in the face of death. "Jin-ho, I should have had you killed when you were still weak enough to die quietly. You tried. Several times." His smile was terrifying, revealing teeth that had been replaced after particularly brutal encounters. "But tonight, it's my turn to try. And unlike you, I don't make mistakes." Anita found herself caught between two deadly predators, realizing that her plan might have worked too well. She'd wanted to pressure Madame Choi into releasing Minjun, not start a war that could consume half of Seoul's criminal underworld. Mr. Park, she said carefully, we discussed terms. Mrs. Choi cooperates with the authorities, and she gets to live to face trial. Park Jin-ho's attention turned to her, his single eye assessing her with the cold calculation of a professional killer. You must be the American girl who started this war. I have to admit, I'm impressed. It takes considerable skill and ruthlessness to bring down the Choi Empire from the inside. I just want my fiancé back safely. And you'll have him. But Mrs. Choi and I have unfinished business that goes back 20 years. She killed my brother during a territorial dispute, had my wife and children murdered while I was in prison, burned down everything I spent my life building. His voice was quiet, but filled with decades of suppressed rage. There can be no mercy for her. Some debts can only be paid in blood. The sound of helicopters grew louder, and through the windows, they could see military-style aircraft circling the mansion. Spotlights swept the grounds, revealing the full scope of the battle taking place outside. It seems we're about to have official company, Madame Choi observed, her voice carrying a hint of her old authority. The government tends to frown on private wars being fought in residential neighborhoods. Park Jin-ho checked his weapon, a gesture that spoke of long experience with law enforcement interruptions. Then we'd better finish our business quickly. But before he could move, the windows exploded inward as black-clad figures rappelled down from helicopters hovering just outside the building. Elite military tactical teams flooded the room, their weapons trained on everyone present, their movements coordinated with precision that spoke of extensive training and planning. Nobody move. Weapons on the ground, hands where we can see them. The team leader's voice boomed through his helmet's speaker system. Through the chaos of shouting soldiers and broken glass, a figure stepped through what remained of the window frame. Anita's heart nearly stopped as she recognized Minjun, alive and apparently unharmed, flanked by men in military gear and looking every inch the strategic mastermind she'd fallen in love with. Did you really think I'd let you handle this alone? He said to Anita, his eyes never leaving his mother's shocked face. How did you? Madame Choi stammered, her worldview clearly shattered by her son's unexpected appearance. Mireille contacted me 3 days ago and explained your plan, Minjun said, his voice ice-cold as he addressed his mother. She helped me escape from that Swiss facility and provided evidence to Korean intelligence about the scope of your criminal activities. I've been coordinating with the authorities ever since. That's impossible. You were sedated under medical supervision. I was sedated for exactly 6 hours, long enough for Mireille's contacts to arrange my transfer to a different facility, one that specializes in protecting witnesses rather than silencing them. Minjun stepped closer to his mother, his expression a mixture of disappointment and barely controlled anger. Mother, you're under arrest for kidnapping, extortion, money laundering, conspiracy, and approximately 47 other charges. The lead investigator, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, stepped forward with a set of handcuffs. Madame Choi, by the authority of the Korean National Police Agency and in cooperation with Interpol, you are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent, and anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As they led Madame Choi away in handcuffs, she turned back to Anita with pure hatred burning in her eyes. This isn't over, girl. Even from prison, I have resources, people who owe me favors, debts that will be collected. You may have won this battle, but the war is far from finished. Actually, it is finished. Mireille's voice came from the doorway as she entered, holding a tablet computer. Your remaining allies just received comprehensive evidence of every double-cross, every betrayal, every time you sold them out to save yourself over the years. They're not going to be helping you anymore. In fact, several of them are currently competing to see who can provide the most damaging testimony against you. As Madame Choi was dragged away, her protests and threats echoing through the mansion's corridors, Park Jin-ho holstered his weapon with obvious reluctance. This isn't how I wanted it to end, he admitted to Minjun. I wanted her blood on my hands, wanted to look into her eyes as she died and know that justice had finally been served. Justice is being served, Minjun replied calmly. She'll spend the rest of her life in prison, stripped of everything she valued most, power, respect, control over others. For someone like her, That's a fate worse than death. Park Jin-ho studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're wiser than your mother ever was, boy. Perhaps there's hope for your family name yet. Guys, I literally cannot believe what just happened. Drop a comment right now and tell me if you saw that plot twist coming, because I definitely didn't. But hold on tight, because we're not done yet. There's still more drama ahead that's going to blow your mind. Don't you dare click away now. 1 month later, Anita stood in the same courthouse where she and Minjun had originally planned to have a small civil ceremony, but the circumstances were dramatically different. Instead of a quiet wedding, they were attending Madame Choi's preliminary hearing, watching as prosecutors laid out a case that would likely result in multiple life sentences. The woman who had once commanded an empire now sat at the defendant's table looking diminished and defeated. Prison had not been kind to her. Her perfect appearance was gone, replaced by the standard orange jumpsuit and the haunted look of someone who had lost everything they'd spent their life building. The defendant's criminal organization, the prosecutor was saying, was responsible for over 200 documented murders, thousands of cases of extortion and blackmail, and the laundering of an estimated $3 billion in illegal proceeds over the past 20 years. Anita squeezed Minjun's hand as they listened to the litany of charges. Each count represented lives destroyed, families torn apart, innocence corrupted. The scope of Madame Choi's crimes was staggering, even to those who thought they understood the extent of her power. Furthermore, the prosecutor continued, the defendant attempted to have her own son illegally committed to a psychiatric facility in order to maintain control of her criminal empire. This represents not just criminal conspiracy, but a fundamental betrayal of the most basic human bonds. When Madame Choi was given the opportunity to speak, she stood slowly, her eyes finding Anita and Minjun in the gallery. I regret nothing, she said, her voice still carrying traces of her old authority. Everything I did was to protect my family's legacy, to ensure that the empire I built would survive for future generations. If my son chooses to throw that away for a woman who will never truly understand our world, that is his mistake to make. Minjun started to stand, anger flashing in his eyes, but Anita pulled him back down. Don't give her the satisfaction, she whispered. She's already lost everything that matters. The judge set a trial date for 6 months in the future and ordered Madame Choi held without bail, citing her extensive criminal network and history of violence. As she was led away, she turned one last time to look at her son. You were my greatest achievement, she called out, her voice breaking slightly. And my greatest disappointment. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around them, shouting questions about the case, their relationship, and their plans for the future. Minjun handled the media attention with practiced ease, making a brief statement about their commitment to helping victims of organized crime and their intention to use their experience to prevent others from suffering similar trauma. Miss Williams, one reporter called out, how does it feel to know that your relationship was the catalyst for bringing down one of Korea's most powerful crime families? Anita considered the question carefully before answering. Love isn't supposed to be easy, but it's supposed to be worth fighting for. What happened here wasn't about bringing down a crime family. It was about refusing to let fear and hatred win over love and justice. 3 weeks after the hearing, they finally had their wedding ceremony, this time in a small garden overlooking Seoul's skyline. The guest list was carefully curated, close friends, family members who had supported their relationship, and several people whose lives had been touched by their fight against the Choi Empire. Hyunwoo served as best man, having proven his loyalty throughout the ordeal and earned a role in the legitimate businesses they were building from the ashes of his mother's criminal empire. Mireille stood as Anita's maid of honor, having become not just an ally, but a genuine friend through their shared experience of survival and justice. You may kiss the bride, the minister announced, and Minjun didn't need to be told twice. As their lips met, the small crowd erupted in applause, but all Anita could hear was her heartbeat and Minjun's whispered, I love you, against her ear. The view from the garden encompassed the entire city spread out below them, a city where they'd fought for their love and won, but also where new challenges would inevitably arise. The reception was held at a restaurant owned by one of Minjun's cousins, a warm, family-owned place that felt like home rather than a display of wealth and power. As they swayed together on the makeshift dance floor, Minjun pulled Anita closer. "Do you regret any of it?" he asked softly. "Everything you went through to be here, everything you had to sacrifice and risk?" "Never," she replied without hesitation. "Though I have to admit, when your mother said I couldn't marry any of her sons, I didn't expect to prove her wrong quite so dramatically." She always underestimated the people she saw as beneath her station. It was her greatest weakness and ultimately what brought about her downfall. Speaking of what comes next, Anita glanced around the room at their guests, many of whom were former criminals trying to build legitimate lives. "Are you ready for the challenge ahead? Taking over the legal businesses, cleaning up the family's reputation, helping people escape the criminal world." Minjun's smile was confident but tempered with the wisdom that came from surviving their ordeal. "With you by my side, I'm ready for anything. We've already proven that love can overcome the worst that people can do to each other." But even as they celebrated their victory and their love, both of them knew that their triumph came with ongoing responsibilities and potential dangers. The criminal empire that Madame Choi had built was in shambles, but that left a power vacuum that other families and organizations were eager to fill. The legitimate businesses they'd inherited carried decades of complicated relationships and obligations that would require careful navigation. Moreover, the very public nature of their victory had made them symbols of resistance against organized crime, which brought its own risks and responsibilities. They'd received messages of support from victims of criminal organizations around the world, but also threats from people who saw their success as a dangerous precedent. 5 weeks into their honeymoon in a secluded villa in Tuscany, their peaceful interlude was shattered by an urgent call from Hyunwoo. "You need to come back to Seoul immediately," he said, his voice tight with stress. "There's been a major development." "What kind of development?" Anita asked, putting the call on speaker so Minjun could listen. "Mother escaped during a prisoner transfer. 3 guards are dead, a 4th is in critical condition, and she's disappeared completely." The news hit them like a physical blow. Minjun's face went white as the implications sank in. How's that possible? She was supposed to be in maximum security, with multiple layers of protection. She still had allies we didn't know about, people who were willing to risk everything to free her. The escape was clearly planned and professionally executed. But that's not the worst part. Anita felt her stomach drop. What's the worst part? She left a message spray-painted on the prison wall. "The game isn't over. Some debts can only be paid in blood. I always collect what I'm owed." Their honeymoon was cut short within hours, and they were on Minjun's private jet back to Seoul before sunset. During the 8-hour flight, they received a series of increasingly disturbing updates from Mireille and the security team they'd assembled. "She's been systematically targeting everyone who was involved in her downfall," Mireille reported over the secure satellite connection. "Your parents' restaurant in Atlanta was firebombed last night. Thankfully, they weren't inside, but the message was clear. Someone's been following your sister Sarah to her hospital rotations, taking photographs, making her aware that she's being watched." Anita felt sick. How is this possible? She's been in prison for months. How could she have organized all this? She didn't organize it from prison. The escape was planned from the very beginning, probably before she was even arrested. She wanted us to think we'd won, so we'd let our guard down, relax our security, go back to living normal lives. Minjun's jaw was clenched so tight Anita could see the muscles jumping. "We walked right into her trap. She sacrificed months of her freedom to lull us into a false sense of security." "It gets worse," Mireille continued. "She's not just targeting your family. Park Jin-ho's warehouse was hit last night, 12 of his people are dead, and his operation has been completely destroyed. The prosecutor who led the case against her had his car bombed this morning. He survived, but barely." She's not just seeking revenge, Anita realized with growing horror. She's trying to rebuild her power base through terror, showing everyone that crossing her has consequences that last forever. By the time they landed in Seoul, the situation had escalated further. Madame Choi wasn't just targeting individuals, she was systematically attacking the infrastructure of everyone who had opposed her. Businesses were being firebombed, Families were receiving death threats, and several former allies who had testified against her had been found dead in ways that sent clear messages to others who might consider cooperation with authorities. "She's recruited professional killers," Mireille explained as they huddled in a secure safe house on the outskirts of the city. Military contractors from Eastern Europe, mercenaries with no ties to Korea and no concern for local politics. They're just here to complete contracts and collect payment. "How many?" Minjun asked grimly. "Our intelligence suggests at least 30, possibly more. They're well-funded, well-equipped, and completely ruthless." The weight of their situation settled over them like a suffocating cloud. They weren't just fighting one vengeful woman anymore. They were facing a small army of professional killers led by someone who had intimate knowledge of their weaknesses, their routines, their loved ones. "We need help," Minjun admitted, his voice heavy with the realization of how outmatched they were. "More help than we can get through official channels." "What are you suggesting?" Anita asked, though she suspected she already knew. "I'm suggesting we make temporary alliances with people I swore I'd never work with again." 2 days later, Anita found herself in another underground meeting, this one in an abandoned subway station beneath Seoul. Minjun was negotiating with representatives from 3 rival crime families, trying to convince them that Madame Choi's return represented a threat to all of them. "The old woman has lost her mind," declared Lee Sang-wook, the elderly head of the Lee crime family. "Hiring foreign mercenaries, attacking families instead of just the people who wronged her directly, leaving evidence everywhere like some kind of amateur. She's violating every rule we've operated by for 50 years. Rules that she helped establish," pointed out Kim Dae-jung, leader of a mid-level smuggling operation. "Why should we risk our people and resources to clean up your family's mess?" "Because if you don't stop her now, you'll be next on her list," Minjun replied with quiet conviction. "This isn't just about revenge against me and my wife. She's trying to destabilize the entire power structure of organized crime in Seoul. Today it's us, tomorrow it could be any of you who crosses her or refuses to acknowledge her authority." The negotiations continued for hours, with each family leader demanding concessions, guarantees, and compensation for their involvement. The irony wasn't lost on Anita that they were asking for help from the same types of criminals they'd been working to oppose, but survival sometimes required uncomfortable compromises. "The price of your mother's madness is too high for all of us to pay," Lee Sang-wook finally concluded. "We'll provide manpower and intelligence to help track her down, but in exchange, we want territorial concessions and a significant portion of the legitimate business empire you're building." "Agreed," Minjun said without hesitation, understanding that the alternative was likely death for everyone they cared about. "There's one more condition," Kim Dae-jung added. "When we find her, we handle the final justice our way. No more arrests, no more trials. Some problems can only be solved permanently." Minjun looked at Anita, seeing the conflict in her eyes. They'd fought so hard to choose justice over revenge, to prove that legal solutions were better than violence. But Madame Choi had shown that she would never stop, never accept defeat, never allow them to live in peace. "Agreed," Anita said quietly, the words tasting bitter but necessary. The final confrontation came sooner than any of them expected. Mireille's expanded intelligence network, now supported by the resources of multiple criminal organizations, located Madame Choi's new base of operations within 48 hours. She had taken over an abandoned industrial complex on the banks of the Han River, turning it into a fortress complete with armed guards, surveillance systems, and multiple escape routes. The choice of location was strategically brilliant, close enough to the city center to launch attacks, but isolated enough to avoid casual detection. "She's not planning to run this time," Mireille observed as they studied aerial reconnaissance photos of the compound. "She's planning to make her final stand, to force a confrontation that will end with either complete victory or complete destruction. Then we give her the war she wants," Minjun said grimly, "but we make sure we're the ones who survive it." "No." Anita's voice was quiet but firm, cutting through the planning session. "We don't become the monsters she wants us to be. There has to be a better way." "What are you suggesting?" Lee Sang-wook asked, clearly skeptical that any solution short of overwhelming violence would be effective. I'm suggesting we give her what she really wants, a chance to face me personally. She's not going to stop hunting us as long as I'm alive and married to Minjun. But if I offer to trade myself for the safety of everyone else? Absolutely not, Minjun's voice was steel. I'm not losing you to her games, not after everything we've been through together. You won't lose me. But she needs to think she's finally won, that she's gotten exactly what she wanted from the beginning. Anita turned to Mireille. Can you get a message to her? Tell her I want to make a final deal, my life for everyone else's freedom. The meeting was set for midnight at the abandoned industrial complex. Madame Choi had agreed to see Anita alone, though everyone involved knew that alone was relative. The facility would be crawling with armed guards and hidden weapons on both sides. Anita approached the compound wearing multiple tracking devices and a Kevlar vest concealed beneath her clothes, though she had little confidence that such precautions would matter if Madame Choi was truly intent on killing her. The industrial complex was a maze of rusted machinery, broken windows, and shadows that could conceal an army of threats. She found Madame Choi waiting in what had once been the main assembly floor, seated on an ornate chair that had clearly been brought in specifically for this meeting. The older woman looked different, thinner, harder, with the desperate edge of someone who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. So Madame Choi said, her voice echoing in the empty space, "The little bird has finally come home to roost. I must admit, I'm impressed by your courage, if not your intelligence. I've come to make a final deal. You stop targeting my family, you call off your mercenaries, you leave Minjun alone to build whatever life he chooses. In exchange, I disappear forever. You'll never see me or hear from me again." Madame Choi's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Oh, my dear, naive girl. You still don't understand what this has become. This was never just about you disappearing. This is about paying for the humiliation you caused me, the empire you helped destroy, the son you turned against his own mother." Armed figures emerged from the shadows surrounding them, but instead of the European mercenaries Anita had expected, she recognized several faces. Former Choi family soldiers who had remained loyal to their matriarch even through her imprisonment and disgrace. "You see," Madame Choi continued, standing slowly and walking closer with predatory grace, "I've had months to think about this moment, to plan exactly how I wanted it to unfold. Killing you quickly would be a mercy you don't deserve. Instead, I'm going to destroy you slowly, piece by piece, starting with the people you love most." "What are you talking about? Minjun isn't here, isn't he?" Madame Choi smiled with cold satisfaction as more guards entered the space, dragging a bound figure between them. Anita's heart stopped when she saw Minjun's face, bruised and bloodied but alive, his eyes burning with rage despite his helpless situation. How Anita began, her mind struggling to process how their carefully laid plans had gone so catastrophically wrong. "Did you really think I wouldn't anticipate your little rescue attempt?" Madame Choi's smile was triumphant. "I've been playing these games since before you were born, child. Your husband walked directly into my trap the moment he tried to position his people around this facility." Anita felt the crushing weight of failure settling over her. They'd been so focused on protecting her during this meeting that they'd left Minjun vulnerable to capture, exactly as Madame Choi had planned. Now, the older woman continued, "You're both going to pay for your defiance. But first, I want you to understand exactly what your love has cost. Because of your selfishness, your refusal to simply disappear when I gave you the chance, good people are going to die tonight." But before she could elaborate on her threats, the lights suddenly went out, plunging the entire facility into darkness. Emergency lighting flickered on a few seconds later, but in those crucial moments of confusion, everything changed. The sound of gunfire erupted from multiple directions as the allied crime families launched their coordinated assault. Smoke grenades filled the air, creating chaos and confusion among Madame Choi's guards. In the mayhem, Anita threw herself toward Minjun, trying to reach him before the crossfire became deadly. "You planned this!" Madame Choi screamed over the noise of automatic weapons and shouted orders. "You used yourself as bait." "No," came Mireille's voice from somewhere in the smoke-filled darkness. "We used her as a distraction." While you were focused on your grand confrontation, we were systematically dismantling your entire operation. The gunfire gradually subsided as Madame Choi's forces were overwhelmed by the superior numbers and firepower of the allied families. When the smoke cleared, the older woman found herself surrounded by armed enemies, her mercenaries either dead or fled, her loyal soldiers defeated. "It's over," Minjun said as Anita cut through his restraints with a knife one of their allies had provided. "Mother, this time it's really over." But Madame Choi wasn't finished. Even facing certain death, she maintained the arrogance that had defined her entire life. "You think you've won something here tonight? You've just replaced one criminal empire with 3 others. Seoul's underworld doesn't get cleaned up, it just changes management." "Maybe," Anita replied, helping Minjun to his feet. "But at least the new management doesn't destroy families for sport." "You naive little girl. You have no idea what you've unleashed. These people you've allied with, they're going to demand payment for their help. Blood payment. Territory. Power. In 6 months, you'll be just as complicit in criminal activity as I ever was." Lee Sang-wook stepped forward, his weapon trained on Madame Choi. "Enough talking. Some debts can only be paid one way." But before anyone could act, the industrial complex filled with the sound of helicopters and the harsh glare of searchlights. Military vehicles surrounded the building as elite police tactical teams rappelled through skylights and broken windows. "Drop your weapons. Everyone on the ground." The amplified voice of the tactical commander echoed through the space. In the chaos that followed, as criminals and police sorted themselves out through a complex process of negotiation and identification, Madame Choi made one last desperate play for revenge. Concealed in her clothing, she had kept a small pistol, and as the authorities moved to arrest her, she turned it toward Anita. "If I can't have my empire," she snarled, "at least I can have your blood." The gunshot that followed was deafening in the enclosed space, but it wasn't Madame Choi who fired. Mireille, moving with reflexes honed by years of survival in the criminal world, put 3 bullets center mass into the older woman before she could complete her final act of vengeance. Madame Choi collapsed to the concrete floor, her eyes wide with surprise and fury. With her last breath, she looked directly at Minjun and whispered, "You were my greatest achievement and my greatest failure." Then she was gone, and with her died the last remnant of an empire built on fear, violence, and the destruction of everything that threatened her vision of power. The aftermath was complex and drawn out. The various crime family representatives were arrested but quickly released after providing information about Madame Choi's mercenary network and terrorist activities. The authorities, while not approving of vigilante justice, recognized that the threat she represented had been neutralized more efficiently than any legal process could have managed. Mireille faced charges for the killing, but was ultimately granted immunity in exchange for her cooperation in dismantling the remaining networks of corruption that had supported the Choi Empire. The evidence she provided led to the arrest of over 100 officials, from local police to high-ranking government ministers. 6 months later, Anita stood in the office of what had once been Madame Choi's criminal headquarters, now transformed into the Seoul Center for Victims of Organized Crime. The irony wasn't lost on her that the woman who had tried to destroy her life had ultimately provided the resources necessary to help thousands of people escape similar fates. "The prosecutor general wants to meet with us next week," Minjun announced as he entered the office, carrying a stack of case files. "They're interested in expanding our witness protection program to cover victims of international trafficking." "That's excellent news. We're going to need more funding if we want to help everyone who's been coming forward since the story broke internationally." Their work wasn't without its dangers and complications. There were still people in Seoul's underworld who resented their efforts to legitimize former criminal enterprises and help ex-convicts find legal employment. They received death threats regularly, and their security expenses were substantial. But for the first time since they'd met, Anita felt like they were building something genuinely positive instead of just surviving from one crisis to the next. "Any word from the families we've been helping?" she asked. Minjun smiled, the expression transforming his face completely. "The Kim family, the one whose father was killed for refusing to launder money through his restaurant, They reopened the business last week using a loan from our foundation. Mrs. Park, whose daughter was trafficked by one of Mother's operations, just graduated from our job training program and has been hired as a social worker. And the children? 37 kids have been placed in safe homes, and the trauma counseling program has a waiting list of over 100 families. We're making a real difference, Anita. Their personal life had also flourished in ways they hadn't dared hope for during the darkest moments of their fight for survival. The small apartment they'd chosen over the family mansion had become a sanctuary where they could simply be themselves, not heirs to a criminal empire or symbols of resistance, just two people who had found something worth fighting for in each other. But their story took an unexpected turn one evening as they were walking through downtown Seoul, returning from dinner with Mireille and her new boyfriend, a former police detective who had been instrumental in cleaning up corruption in the city government. Anita, Minjun said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the busy sidewalk and reaching into his jacket pocket, "There's something I've been wanting to ask you." "Minjun, what are you?" she began, then stopped as she saw what he was pulling out of his pocket. It was a ring, but not the expensive diamond engagement ring his mother had insisted he give her originally. This was a simple band of white gold with a small emerald, exactly the kind of modest, meaningful jewelry Anita had always preferred. "The first time I proposed," Minjun said, dropping to one knee right there on the crowded street as curious passers-by stopped to watch, "it was with a ring my mother chose, in a setting she arranged, following traditions that weren't ours. This time, I want to do it right." Tears were already starting to flow down Anita's cheeks as she realized what was happening. "Anita Williams," he continued, his voice strong and clear despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm them both, "will you marry me again? Not because we're trying to prove something to my family or the world, but because I can't imagine spending another day of my life without you by my side." "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." As he slipped the new ring onto her finger, the crowd that had gathered around them broke into applause. But all Anita could see was Minjun's face. All she could hear was his voice saying, "I love you," against her ear as he lifted her off her feet and spun her around. This time, their wedding was exactly what they wanted, a small ceremony in a traditional Korean garden, with only their closest friends and the family members who had truly supported them through everything. Hyunwoo served as best man again, but this time he was joined by two of the children they'd helped rescue from trafficking operations. Mireille was maid of honor, and her speech brought everyone to tears as she talked about what it meant to choose love over revenge, hope over hatred. 6 months ago, Mireille said, raising her glass in a toast, "I thought that justice could only come through destruction, that the only way to defeat evil was to become more ruthless than our enemies." Anita and Minjun taught me that sometimes the greatest victory is refusing to become the thing you're fighting against. As they danced their first song as newlyweds, again, Anita looked around at the faces surrounding them. Former criminals who were building new lives, police officers and prosecutors who had risked their careers to fight corruption, social workers and counselors who dealt with the human cost of organized crime every day. "Do you think she would have approved?" Minjun asked quietly, and Anita didn't need to ask who he meant. "I think she would have hated everything about this," Anita replied honestly. "And I think that means we got it exactly right." But even as they celebrated their love and their victory over the forces that had tried to destroy them, neither of them could shake the feeling that their story was far from over. The criminal world they'd helped disrupt was slowly reorganizing itself around new power structures, and some of those structures included people who saw the Choi family's transformation as either an opportunity or a threat. 3 weeks into their second honeymoon, this one in a remote villa on the Greek island of Santorini, their peace was interrupted by an encrypted call from Seoul. "There's been a development." Hyunwoo's voice was tense even over the secure satellite connection. "Someone's been asking questions about you too, offering significant money for information about your location, your security arrangements, your daily routines." "What kind of someone?" Minjun asked, his voice immediately shifting to the alert tone Anita recognized from their days of crisis. "International. Professional. The kind of people who don't ask questions unless they're planning something specific." Hyunwoo paused. "There's more." 3 of the prosecutors who worked on Mother's case have received death threats in the past week. Someone spray-painted a message on the courthouse steps: "The Choi family debt remains unpaid." Anita felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Mediterranean evening breeze. But your mother is dead. We all saw her die. Mother had business partners, people who invested in her operations, rival families who respected her enough to honor her final wishes. The criminal world has its own code of honor, and according to that code, we still owe a debt for her death. What kind of debt? Anita asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Blood for blood. Life for life. The people who benefited from her empire for decades, they see our transformation as a theft of what was rightfully theirs. They want compensation, and they're not interested in money. The honeymoon was cut short for the second time in their relationship, but this time they were prepared for the return journey. During the flight back to Seoul, they developed contingency plans, escape routes, and communication protocols with their allies in law enforcement and the legitimate business world. This time is different, Min-jun pointed out as they reviewed their security arrangements. We're not fighting one person's obsession with control. We're dealing with business partners who see us as bad investments that need to be liquidated. Then we treat it like a business problem, Anita replied. We find out what they really want and see if there's a way to give it to them without compromising everything we've built. But the nature of their new enemies became clear soon after they landed in Seoul. Unlike Madame Choi's personal vendetta, this threat was coldly professional. The people hunting them weren't interested in elaborate revenge schemes or psychological torture. They simply wanted the Choi family's transformation to be reversed, by any means necessary. They've hired specialists, Mireille reported during their first security briefing back in Seoul. Not the mercenaries Mother used, but actual professional assassins. People who eliminate problems quietly and efficiently. How many? We don't know. But the intelligence suggests at least 6 different contracts have been taken out, 2 on each of you, and 1 each on Hyunwoo and myself. The weight of the threat was different this time, less personal but more deadly. These weren't criminals acting out of emotion or loyalty. They were professionals who would study their targets, identify weaknesses, and strike with precision when the opportunity presented itself. We can't live like this forever, Anita said after they'd spent a week in various safe houses, moving locations every few hours and communicating only through encrypted channels. If we're constantly running and hiding, we're not really living at all. Then we ended, Min-jun replied grimly. We find out who's financing these contracts and convince them that we're worth more alive than dead. The investigation that followed was like peeling back the layers of an onion, each discovery revealing new depths of complexity in the international criminal networks that had depended on the Choi family's operations. Money trails led through banks in Switzerland, shell companies in Panama, and investment funds in the Cayman Islands. The contracts aren't being funded by any single organization, Mireille explained as she walked them through her findings. It's a consortium of groups that all benefited from your mother's empire. Japanese yakuza who used her shipping routes, Russian oligarchs who laundered money through her businesses, South American cartels who relied on her distribution networks. So we're not just fighting Korean criminals, Anita realized. We're fighting an international coalition that sees our legitimization efforts as a threat to their entire operational structure. Exactly. And they have essentially unlimited resources to throw at the problem. The solution, when it came, was surprisingly straightforward. Instead of trying to fight or hide from their enemies, they decided to make themselves too valuable to kill. The criminal organizations that want us dead, Min-jun explained during a strategy session with their expanded team of allies, they're all facing the same fundamental problem. Law enforcement is getting more sophisticated. International cooperation is increasing, and the traditional ways of doing business are becoming more dangerous and less profitable. So we offer them what they really need, Anita continued, a legitimate path to clean up their operations and protect their assets. Not by helping them commit crimes, but by helping them transition to legal businesses that serve the same functions. It was a risky strategy that required them to walk a fine line between law enforcement cooperation and criminal consultation. But over the course of several months, working with international authorities and using their unique understanding of how criminal empires functioned, they began to broker deals that benefited everyone involved. Former money laundering operations became legitimate financial consulting firms. Drug distribution networks transformed into pharmaceutical companies operating in underserved markets. Protection rackets evolved into private security firms with proper licenses and oversight. "You're not eliminating organized crime," one FBI liaison pointed out during a coordination meeting. "You're legitimizing it. We're channeling it in directions that benefit society instead of destroying it," Anita replied. "These people have skills, resources, and organizational capabilities. The question is whether we want them to use those assets for criminal purposes or legal ones." The transformation wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't complete. But gradually, the death contracts against them were withdrawn as their former enemies realized that cooperation was more profitable than elimination. 1 year later, Anita stood in the office that had once belonged to Madame Choi, now serving as the headquarters of the International Criminal Justice Transition Foundation. Through the window, she could see Seoul's skyline, transformed by urban renewal projects funded partly by former criminal enterprises seeking to legitimize their operations. "The Seoul Metropolitan Police want to expand our mediation program," Min-jun announced as he entered the office, carrying their 6-month-old daughter, who had just woken up from her nap. "They've had a 40% reduction in organized crime violence since we started facilitating negotiations between rival groups." "And how's our little one doing?" Anita asked, taking their daughter and marveling, as she did every day, at the tiny person they'd created together. "She's perfect. Though I think she's going to have her mother's stubborn streak." Anita laughed, remembering the woman who had once declared that she could never marry any of the Choi sons. "I prefer to think of it as determination." Their daughter, who they'd named Hope, seemed to embody everything they'd fought for: a future where love was stronger than hatred, where justice was more powerful than revenge, and where it was possible to build something beautiful from the ashes of destruction. "Do you think we'll be able to give her a normal childhood?" Min-jun asked, voicing the concern that kept both of them awake some nights. "I don't know if normal is the right goal," Anita replied, watching their daughter's tiny fingers explore the texture of her shirt. "But I think we can give her something better. A childhood where she learns that love is worth fighting for, that people can change, and that sometimes the greatest victory comes from refusing to let hatred win." As they stood together in the office that had once been the center of a criminal empire, now transformed into a place of healing and justice, Anita reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun with a declaration of impossibility, that she could never marry any of Madame Choi's sons. It had continued through betrayal, violence, and tests that had pushed them to their absolute limits. But in the end, love had proven stronger than fear, justice had triumphed over revenge, and two people who had refused to give up on each other had managed to transform not just their own lives, but the lives of countless others who had been trapped in cycles of violence and criminality. All right, beautiful viewers, we've reached the end of this absolutely incredible journey. I cannot believe everything that just happened, from that devastating opening scene where Anita was told she could never marry any of Madame Choi's sons, to watching her prove that love really can conquer even the most powerful criminal empire. This story had everything: forbidden romance, family betrayal, international conspiracies, and a love so strong it literally changed the world around them. I need to know what you think in the comments below. Was this ending everything you hoped for, or did I completely blow your mind with those final plot twists? Did you see Anita and Min-jun's transformation of the criminal underworld coming, or were you as shocked as I was? And can we just talk about how absolutely iconic it is that the woman who was told she wasn't good enough for this family ended up being the one who saved it? Don't forget to smash that like button if the story kept you on the edge of your seat for the entire hour, and make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell, because I have so many more incredible stories coming your way. Trust me, if you loved this journey of forbidden love, dangerous families, and the power of never giving up on the people you love, you're going to be absolutely obsessed with what's coming next. Until then, keep believing that love is always worth fighting for, that people can change, and that sometimes the greatest victories come from refusing to become the monsters that others expect you to be. I'll see you in the next video, where we're diving into another world of passion, danger, and love that defies all odds.